So I want to continue on this concept that I started last time I was here, because if you've been in that long, 20, 10, even 10 years. 10 years is okay if you want to talk about the concept of long suffering. Actually, a year even could, depending on what you've gone through. So we all look at that, but we all have experiences with that. So I can say this personally, when I'm looking out here at the topic of long suffering, I'm talking to the choir. You've all been through it in one form or another. There have been things that you've gone through. So let's take a look and start over here in the book of Job. I'm not going to go through Job, but I want to point out a concept that, at least when I looked at it, I thought this is really an interesting concept. We'll start from the very beginning, though. And if you've got headings like I have in mine, it speaks about this man in verse 1, and it does speak that he was upright and blameless. And it says this quite a few times. So we've learned through the years, because if you remember, maybe you thought this as well, or were taught this early on, that Job was a self-righteous person, just had to learn these lessons. And then, wait a second, I looked at the Bible and I said, well, it doesn't say that he was self-righteous, and God doesn't mince words. He's not going to go, well, just kidding. He doesn't do that. And it's not only once that he points this out. There's something that Job had learned through this trial. Obviously, probably a man with great experience with this topic would be Job. This was long-suffering to a max when you see what he went through. And as I stepped back and looked at it, I looked what would be the subject or the outcome of this book. And I thought God took a good man and made him a great man through the trials that he went through. And so we can better understand this maybe when we go through our own trials, that God intends to make us better than we are. He doesn't want us to stay the same. So you see, this man was considered blameless, one who feared God, and he shunned evil. And then in some of the chapter headings that I have, you see in verse 6, I have a chapter heading that says, Satan attacks Job's character. And verse 8, it says, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. So we have an interesting account here now as we see what's going to take place, that God's going to allow Satan to touch him, which shows me as well, another learning point here is, you can't be touched by Satan unless God says it's okay. That's another example, another lesson we see from this book. So it's very encouraging in that way. So we see another heading above verse 13, if you have headings. Mine says, Job loses his property and children. And then I see in verse 22, in all this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. So he was upright and blameless at this point. And then God allows, in chapter 2, Job's health to be attacked as well. And then verse 9, a very difficult one. His wife says, do you still hold to your integrity? Curse God and die. So she gave him a not so good snippet of advice here. So everything seemed to be against him. And then along come three friends. Three friends. Now, what are you thinking when I say three friends? Now, it was true. They were three friends. No doubt about that. In fact, let's take a look at this. They were three friends. That is true. Three friends. They considered themselves to be friends. Job considered them to be friends. But there's sometimes a time when a friend does not always give good advice. We misinterpret. We judge it wrong. All of us have probably done that. We've given somebody a tidbit of advice, and then you find out that you were wrong, and you go, oh, I thought it was that, didn't realize that. It's probably happened to all of us. We've either received or given advice that has always not been sound. But the attempt was there to do this, so let's read what this says. In verse 11, when Job's three friends, it doesn't say there, just kidding. Job's three friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him. Each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamite. They made appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. That's what a good friend would do. And when they raised their eyes from afar off and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. That wasn't some kind of fake ceremony that they did. They really cared for this man. And they sat with him. It says they sat down with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Now, how many of us would sit down with somebody for 7 days and 7 nights, and it's likely that they ate nothing as he wasn't eating anything as well? So here they were fasting for 7 days, and they sat with him. How many could do it for a day? How many of us could do it with a day and not say anything? Oh, I would have so much trouble not saying something. In one day, I got to say something. Please, let me say something. They didn't say a word for a week. That's incredible when you look at that. So were they considered friends? Yes, they were. But it shows now their weakness too. And it doesn't say what happened after that to them, except they had to repent, offer a sacrifice. A lot was learned in this account. But here's one of them right here. They were friends. They sat with him 7 days and 7 nights. That's a long time to sit with somebody and not say a thing. And then, of course, they opened up their mouths and spoke. And that's when the bad stuff came, but that's when a lot of learning came in. See, with Job, that was a test, because he was resisting this, rightly so, because they were falsely accusing him. Now he got that among friends. Now, once again, they made a mistake. It didn't mean that they weren't friends. They wanted to try to help, but they didn't have the wisdom to do it. You know, it would be nice for those 7 days if they cried out to God and go, please give us the help that we need to give this man the wisdom that he needs. Help us to say the right thing. And sometimes people don't ask for counsel from God. We figure we're just going to spit it out from our own knowledge. If we're going to help somebody, we really need the help of God to really be able to really help that person. So a lot was learned in this lesson of Job. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. You know the end of the story of what took place. But the point is, another really big chunk there was they long suffered with him. They stuck out the trial with him. They tried to help him. Otherwise, they could have just gone, well, this guy's not going to accept it. We're just getting out. That would have been not a friend. Just go, you're not going to listen to us. We're out of here. See you later. And so they did long suffer with him. But Job really had to endure the trial. So we covered the aspect of long suffering, the one aspect of endurance in my last sermon, and we broke it down into many different parts. Endurance, we talked about the definitions, the habit of it, the character building, to undergo pain. We went through different examples of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus Christ. We saw that endurance included submitting to each other, about tolerating or bearing with one another. We're going to see more about that in a minute. And of course, lasting. It has to last. You can't cut it short. It's called long suffering. It's not short suffering. So all of us here, again, have gone through trials. Some have been longer trials. Some have been shorter trials. You know, for instance, some have had lengthy illnesses because of the COVID epidemics that have gone out there. I remember sometimes I would wake up in the morning and I would feel the same way. I go, this is not getting better. And it was frustrating because at least sometimes when you have a flu bug or something, you'd at least start to feel a little bit better. And so I can't remember how many days. I don't want to remember how many days, but it was a lot of days. I would get up and go, and I'd try to get up, and I was so tired. My as you would call, it was not diagnosis, but problem. Searching for a word here. Symptom. My symptom was tired. I was just tired. Others had different ones. They were sick. You lost your taste. That didn't happen to me. I was just exhausted. And it was frustrating because I never felt this tired for that long. I'd get up. I didn't want to watch TV. I didn't want to read a book because I was just tired. I would get up and I would go back to sleep and I would sleep again. And that seemed to last for days. And well, there's really nothing you can do about it but bear with it, isn't it? I mean, nothing you can do. But that was just one example of something that's happened of recent. Then there could be other things. You could be involved in a job problem that could last for a long time. I know some here that have gone through those problems. It's just like, I don't know what to do. I can't quit because I need to bring the money in, but yet I get treated this way, and it seemed to last for that long. But as I give these examples, probably all of us could share those and talk about the length of them, how long they went, and the great part about it is that it's over. It's over. You went through those, and it's done. It's over with. And now something else comes up, right? Because we've got a God who's called he's a husbandman. He prunes, and he's going to continue to prune. So we're going to see this because he wants us to get really good at this. And we see so many examples in the Bible to where he worked with the people that are going to be helping in the millennial time as well. We're going to be helping. We're going to understand what it's like for people to have suffered and gone through what they've gone through. We won't even have to say it. Sometimes we feel like, well, I've been through that. Or sometimes if we don't have that attitude of humility and service, we'll be going, oh, that ain't nothing. Let me talk to you about what I went through. And so we learned to grow through that as well. They don't need to necessarily see all the details of what we went through, for us to just understand, for us to give encouraging words, for us to pray with them, to sit with them, to mourn with them for a little bit, is sometimes all that it takes for them to spill out on us, all that they feel, and we don't need to say anything. That's where it requires the wisdom on how to answer. So we get a lot of practice on this. So let's go to the next word. We talked about, I broke this down into 6 points, A, B, C, D, E, F, not 1, 2, 3, 4, because this is the fruit of long-suffering, and there are 9 fruits that we'll be going through. This one, again, is extremely important, and it's something that we can all relate to because we're either in something now that might be a trial, or we've been there, and we can see, okay, thankfully this is over. When you see different parts of life, I wanted to share this with you, as we can certainly share with each other, and I'd like to hear your stories. But last week's In Accord, if you watched it with Mr. Horchak going through Africa with his wife, I know how much this affected somebody in one of our other churches who came up to me and told me about this. He saw the 2 women every morning that had to go a mile or 2 just to get water every day. No cars. They were carrying these big vases on their heads. They had to go get water. And this person, when you see, these are God's people that are doing this and watching them carry every day. They don't think anything of it because it just becomes natural to them. We got to get water? Okay, we're going to go walk and get water. That's what they do. And I pointed out to you, I said, I don't remember a time in my life where I turned on the faucet, water came out. I didn't have to walk a mile for it or 2 miles or whatever. It just came out until last night. I turned on my faucet, no water came out. I go, I can't say that anymore. It's very interesting. A water line broke. So all of a sudden I saw these, we went and the neighbors all came out and said, what's going on? No, the really nice thing about that, none of the neighbors were complaining. They actually some went down there and said, what can we do? The one when they were working on the water line in front of her house, she gave them water. They were working on it during the day. So they gave her, she gave them water and even gave them a pizza. She goes, oh, these guys are working, they're hot, but no complaints, which was great. What's going on? Where's my water? You didn't get any of that. So I don't live in an Israelite neighborhood. So that's good. So I also later on, so this is a little bit later on now, so I found out my water's not working, so I took them water as well. I offered them water. They were grateful for it, and I go, it's nice. And the one worker said, really, thanks for thinking of us. I go, well, you guys are working really hard here, I really appreciate you, getting this done and getting it fixed. And sure enough, about 20 minutes later, the water came back on. So it's so interesting when you see what happens in our neck of the woods over in this blessed country, and sometimes we just forget about that. Those luxuries that we have when we see our fellow brethren that have got to walk miles just to get water. Now, if you've not seen this, we helped get a well built on that property. And to them, this is like, I mean, they struck oil, you know, to get water coming right to their area now. It's a wonderful blessing, and we hope that we can do this for others too. But it makes you think about this. These people don't complain. They long suffered. They don't even think of it as a trial. They're just grateful to have water. And so everybody goes through their own different crises in different ways and looks at it in different ways at all. Let's take a look at this next concept here, because again, we have testimonies from the Bible. We've got modern day testimonies as well that we can use. The next word, which would be under B, would be called fortitude. Fortitude, interesting word, because in the English language it starts with that word fort. Fortitude, so it makes you even think about that. Fortitude, if you take a look at the definition, it can mean courage in pain or adversity. Now that's actually the definition of endure and well. So all of these words tie in, but it shows the depth and the richness of the vocabulary that's used with long-suffering. And it kind of breaks it down for us to really understand that there's a lot more to it than just one concept. Courage in pain and adversity. So let me ask you, if you would hear the word courage, now you better all know this, and I'm sure that you do. If you hear the word courage, what book of the Bible would you go to? If you hear the word courage, which book of the Bible would you go to? The kids sing the song. Referring to who? Joshua. Joshua. So let's go over to the book of Joshua, chapter 1. Joshua, chapter 1. See, these concepts here can be for our children as well. They're going to be leaders someday, and anytime, if you realize you've been in a leadership position, doesn't matter where it is. Could be at your work, could be anywhere. Anytime that you're a leader, you will get looked upon, you will get criticism. You will get somebody that would like to take your job. You will get mistreated. So some think of it as just a position where I can rule and tell others what to do. That's not what it's like at all. That's not the concept. Sometimes you've got to direct people. Sometimes you do have to be a little bit stronger when they're not complying to maybe a certain law or a rule, and sit down with them in a certain way. But Joshua was given a command by God because he's the one that replaced Moses. Now, if you were replacing Moses, trying to think how that would be compared to our modern day times today, would it be like someone replacing, a president replacing Abraham Lincoln? You know, when you think of a certain greatness within certain people, Lincoln faced a time of adversity big time. In fact, he was shot for it. He was killed for it because someone didn't like his thought process. He had a lot to deal with because he had a divided country. He had a civil war to deal with. A guy like Winston Churchill, a man that rose to the occasion with certain leadership skills. Who replaces people like this? You don't have many good leaders that you find that react in a very positive way when they face adversity. God knew this about with Joshua because he was replacing Moses, and there was no one else like Moses that had a relationship with God like Moses did. God knew that. He knew that Moses would need this, so he said in verse 6, Joshua 1, "Be strong and of good courage, for to this people you will divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give to them." So he had a commanded thing to do. He would get them over there, he would conquer the territory, and he would divide it. That's what he was told and instructed to do by God Almighty, and God knew that he would need the courage and strength to do that. Let me ask you this. Do you think he would need the courage to fight the adversary, whoever was over there, the Canaanites? Well, you obviously, if you're going to kick somebody out, you do need strength, but he needed more strength with his own people. When you see what they were like, he was criticized as more than Moses was. Moses had that relationship with God, and they murmured against him. So was it going to be anything different for Joshua? No, it'd probably be worse. So he told it to him twice. Verse 7, he says, only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. And so we got our camp theme. Don't turn to the right, don't turn to the left. The narrow path. The narrow path was one of our themes for camp. And when you go through life and you start messing with that, you realize it doesn't go so well when we veer to the left or we veer to the right. When God says something, every word we live by, we go straight down the line. And when we start to trickle out from that, it doesn't work so well, does it? We'll find that out because God cares for us. And we'll go through trials to figure out what we just did wrong. The Israelites just didn't consider it. So they had to experience some of these negative things. So the Israelites were commanded to drive or destroy the inhabitants out of the land of Canaan. Now, let's skip forward here to chapter 7. Chapter 7, and see what happens. Only after 6 chapters, some time goes by, and you get to chapter 7. And you see a problem that's already occurring here. Chapter 7, and verse 1. But the children of Israel committed a trespass regarding the accursed things, for Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed things. So the anger of the Lord burned against the children of Israel. Somebody thought that they were exempt from the law of God. And it caused a problem among the whole camp. Now, probably others may have known about it as well. It says, you're not supposed to do this, and they did this. Don't take of these things. They're pagan. So Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Bethaven on the east side of Bethel, spoke to them, saying, go up and spy out the country. And so they did. They returned to Joshua and said to him, do not let all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack. Do not weary all of the people. So a few went. But you know how that turned out. Not very good at all. So about 3,000 men went up from the people, but they fled before the men of Ai. The men of Ai struck down about 36 men, for they chased them from before the gate as far as Shebarim, struck them down on the descent. Therefore the hearts of the people melted and became like water. When you go against the law of God, what's told to us, and especially if you know better, don't expect to be courageous in the face of adversity, because it's God the one that gives us the courage. But when we depart from his ways, you're going to find out your hearts are you're going to wonder, what's going to happen to me? Why is this not going so well? Then we've got to re-gear, think, is it something that we did? Not always the fact, always, but this was a fact. This did take place. This did happen. As a result of disobedience to the law of God, their courage fled. Verse 11. Israel has sinned, and they have transgressed my covenant which I commanded them, for they have even taken some of the accursed things, and have both stolen and deceived, and they have also put it among their own things. Therefore the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their backs before their enemies, because they have become doomed to destruction. Neither will I be with you any more. And thankfully here it was unless you destroy the accursed thing among your people. And so I won't go through the whole story, but that's what they did to get back what we would call in good graces before God. So they would be able to go in and conquer the land, but they thought they could always do it their own way. This won't be a big deal. And every little thing is a big deal to God. So chapter 9, we see in chapter 9 and verse 14. Joshua chapter 9, verse 14. Then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. So Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant to let them live, and the rulers of the congregation swore to them. It didn't work out so well for them because they didn't ask counsel of God. And anytime we don't ask counsel with God, it's not going to work. And the question for us is, how involved is God in our daily lives? Because if we ask for specific things, as I ask, I know it's always worked out if we're looking for the right reasons. So something as simple as a preteen camp. Please pray to God that he would show us. So we saw a nice camp. I'm not determining that that's where it's going to be. Because I would like God to make this clear. There are a lot of people that are involved with this. There are things that probably we can't see about that camp that God may know. So in everything, that could be in everything, in every decision that we ask, show me what to do here, guide me, open up the doors, and if it's not right, please close the doors, show me clearly. As someone asked me as far as even guidance and direction in their life as far as what they would like to do, a profession. I say, ask God. Ask God to show you clearly. It could be a lot of things. And of course, we're going to see in the future, in a couple of testimonies here, that some did the best that they can to prepare themselves for what they could do, but they still get God involved and ask for the rest. God wants to see us do our part, but then he wants us to see him as on the top of the list. How involved is God in our daily lives? Constant contact restores and assures courage. And you can write that one down for sure. Constant contact restores and assures courage. We can be confident if we've asked God to guide and show us. It might not always go in the smoothest of ways. Maybe God wants us to experience some bumps in life sometimes. Other times, doors open, and it's very easy. He can easily open the doors in so many things. So let's go to another testimony in 2 Chronicles chapter 32. This is always one that's encouraging to read because you had few good kings in Israel. You had a few more in Judah, and this was one of them, but you see more bad news than you do good news. In our day today, we're probably seeing more bad news, I think, among our leaders. Sometimes you'll see a good one step out. You go, well, I like the way that he talks or the way that he thinks. And, you know, if he's talking from his heart, if that's truly what he believes. But you get a lot of politicians that you don't know what they believe. But we're having a leadership crisis in this country, obviously. And it's no different from what happened previously in Israel and in Judah. So in 2 Chronicles 32, you see Sennacherib come in and starts invading Judah. Verse 1, after these deeds of faithfulness, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered Judah. He encamped with them against the fortified cities, thinking to win them over to himself. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and that his purpose was to make war against Jerusalem, he took counsel with his leaders and commanders to stop the water from the springs which were outside the city, and they helped him. Thus many people gathered together who stopped all the springs and the brook that ran through the land, saying, why should the kings of Israel come and find much water? Now, it doesn't speak of this right here, but if you ever go over to Jerusalem, that's one of the sights to see, because you'll see where Hezekiah did this and he had water come into the city. That was back in his time. That happened then, and this is thousands of years ago that this took place. Verse 5, it says, he strengthened himself, built up the wall that was broken, raised it up to the towers, and built another wall outside. He repaired the Millo in the city of David and made weapons and shields in abundance. Then he set military captains over the people, gathered them together to him in the open square of the city gate, and gave them encouragement, saying, be strong and courageous. I wonder where he got that from. Now think about this. If you were going to be a king, there was a command in Deuteronomy that the king had to do when he became king. Do you remember what that was? He had to write a copy of the book of the law. If you wrote a copy, you'd probably remember that. Because if you were going to be a leader, and Joshua was a leader, you could relate to that. You go, oh, wow, I'm going to be king of over all these people. You know, what's the thing I should do? You appeal to God like Solomon did, and you ask for wisdom and strength and courage. And this is what he encouraged his people to do. Do not be afraid, nor dismayed before the king of Assyria, nor before all the multitude that is with him, for there are more with us than with him. And yet it still wasn't even a matter of numbers. He had to know that as well. I mean, there he was in a fortified city. But verse 8, look how he put this into perspective. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. And the people were strengthened by the words of Hezekiah, the king of Judah. He did the right thing. He directed the people to look to God, and yet he also did his part. After this, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, sent his servants to Jerusalem, but he himself and all the forces with him laid siege against Lachish. And you know what? God allowed Lachish to fall. That city came down. I remember going over to that city and seeing the story of that, and you can still see the written engravements of how the Assyrians took Lachish, and they impaled the people there, and they marched them before the walls of Jerusalem. God allowed Lachish to be taken, but he didn't allow Jerusalem to be taken. We'll see this. So that's how they had to be strengthened as well. Thus says Sennacherib, king of Assyria, "And what do you trust that you remain under siege in Jerusalem? Does not Hezekiah persuade you to give yourselves over to die by famine and by thirst, saying, 'The Lord our God will deliver us up from the hand of king of Assyria'? Has not the same Hezekiah taken away his high places and his altars, and commanded Judah and Jerusalem, saying, 'You shall worship before one altar and burn incense on it'?" So he was questioning this. You know, I hope you and I, if we were there, would have said, yeah, that's exactly what he did. And that's exactly what we're going to follow. He did take away all the other high places. We only worship one God. That's exactly right, Sennacherib. So have at it. And they're going to be just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It says, it doesn't matter. God could allow this city to be taken. That doesn't matter. And you could stand up so strong against this guy who was so arrogant. What do you think God felt when he said these words? As I'm looking at this, I'm back by there's Hezekiah, I'm here, and I'm listening to these words, and I'm thinking, this guy is in big trouble. For the words he's saying, this guy is in big trouble. Because you know what? You had a good king. He was a good king. He's not a perfect king, but he was a good king. Verse 13, "Do you not know what I and my fathers have done to all the peoples of the other lands? Were the gods of the other nations of those lands in any way able to deliver up their lands out of my hand? No, because they weren't gods. That's what happened there. This is different. Who was there among all the gods of those nations that my fathers utterly destroyed that could deliver his people from my hand, that your God should be able to deliver you from my hand? Now therefore, do not let Hezekiah deceive you or persuade you like this, and do not believe him. For no God of any nation or kingdom was able to deliver this people from my hand or the land of my fathers. How much less will your God deliver you from myself?" And his servants spoke even more against the Lord God and against his servant Hezekiah. And he also wrote letters to revile the Lord God of Israel and to speak against him, saying, "As the gods of the nations of other lands have not delivered their people from my hand, so the God of Hezekiah will not deliver his people from his hand." Then they called out with a loud voice in Hebrew to the people on the wall who were on the wall to frighten them and trouble them, that they might take the city. And they spoke against the God of Jerusalem as against the gods of the people of the earth, the work of men's hands. Once again, maybe we can take a look at it in a different way. Because now when I see this, even repeating and going through this history, I'm picturing myself as being there. I'm kind of going, oh, this guy is in really big trouble. He is in really big trouble. This guy is so arrogant. He's speaking against the God of Israel. How do you think God was taking that? You know, again, Judah had to repent, just like the Israelites did, but they had a good king, and he took all the high places away. They were at a higher point because a good king came in and was teaching about the one God. So they weren't perfect. But God was still looking upon them and still cared for his people. Verse 20, now for this cause, King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, prayed and cried out to heaven. Then the Lord sent an angel who cut down every mighty man of valor, leader and captain in the camp of the king of Assyria. So he returned shamefaced to his own land. When he had gone into the temple of his God, some of his own offspring struck him down with the sword there. And the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, from the hand of all the others, and guided them on every side, brought gifts to the Lord at Jerusalem, presents to Hezekiah, king of Judah, so that he was exalted in the sight of all nations thereafter. Verse 23, very interesting. Not so soon after that, same thing happened a little bit, because it just tends to happen. The difficulty with power and being a king, as you can see what happened to Solomon in the time where he asked for all this wisdom and God gave it to him. And the temple was incredible. And as I went to that one scripture I showed, he built the temple, then he built a bigger house for himself, and he built one for what became his another wife and concubine, who God said, don't do that. And he built a house for her. And you're looking at this going, oh no, this is not going to work out so well. So all of a sudden you see Hezekiah being exalted. This would be a high time, because Assyria was the most powerful nation on the face of the earth under Sennacherib. They had done all these things and defeated all these nations. And now God himself just takes them out with an angel. They don't have to even lift a sword against the Assyrians. And all of a sudden, Hezekiah gets sick. And it says in verse 26, he humbled himself for the pride of his heart. Interesting. He saw, okay, something's happening. Interesting. Doesn't it take sometimes a sickness so that we can see we are still flesh and blood? It's so easy to go on in our life and become arrogant and pride, because we don't need anything. I'm healthy, everything's going well. Well, he was struck down. And God caused him to humble himself. So even Hezekiah got pruned. And God spared him, gave him 15 more years to live. So we saw how God worked with somebody in here, but the lesson was here that as a leader, Hezekiah called upon God, and God gave him that fortitude, that courage in adversity. Wonderful thing to take place. Let's continue to the third letter, C. A was endurance, B was fortitude, C is the word forbearance. Forbearance. Now this word, interestingly, because it's going to be a word of its own as well, that's how all these intertwine, and the depth again of these. Forbearance means patience with one and another. Forbearance, patience with one another. Now we're going to go to some scriptural examples here. Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. And maybe you can remember examples. Maybe you've grown in this area because God's church has got a variety of different members with a lot of different personalities. And not always have they got along with each other. Maybe it was a different minister. I remember complaints about different ministers. Well, he doesn't do this. And yet we're all told that if you get another minister, I know ministers now that will actually on their way out, they'll say, by the way, the one that's coming in may not be like me. He may operate differently. And sometimes people have a hard time with that. And yet the Bible itself says there's different administrations, there's different ways of doing things. They're going to have different personalities as well. Now maybe the one that you got along so well has got a different personality. He may get along with somebody else. And so we have to have this forbearance with each other. Because we're all so different. And it's a challenge. I remember a recount of someone that mentioned to me, it can happen at the feast, that someone had set their books down to save their seats. And when they came back, there was another person in their seats. They had just taken up the book and moved it and sat down. And that got her really mad. And that would be a good time really to get mad, wouldn't it? What can you do? Can you chastise the person? Can you yell at them? Or can you just go, you know something? I'm just going to go find another seat. Have pity on the person that did that, because it wasn't the right thing to do. But the best for you and I is to go, I'm not going to even let that affect my feast at all. I'm going to go, I'll go find something else. And sometimes that's what takes place. So a lot of different examples that we find when it comes to those things, but we find more even in the Bible in Ephesians chapter 4 and let's look at verse 1. Ephesians 4 verse 1. You've had Mr. Frenchak here, and I just won't forget that. Nobody wants to have a grumpy feast. Last thing you want to do is be grumpy. I mean, I want to go to the feast, and I want to rejoice in the Sabbath. I love the Sabbath day. But how much more even the Feast of Tabernacles, which pictures the millennial time when long-suffering will pretty much be done for us. We'll have to forbear with the people that are physical on the face of this earth. But I think by that time that we got the lesson down, because we're called saints. And if God is long-suffering with us and He's that one down perfectly, we're going to be God too. I think we're going to have that one down perfectly. So it'll just be working with somebody, understanding we might have to prune them a little bit now. A little bit of a smile on our faces, because in the pruning process, God is merciful with us. He doesn't give us more pruning than we can handle. That's for sure. Ephesians 4, verse 1. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to have a walk worthy of the calling with which you were called. So he shows us again who we are and the responsibility that we have, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. And it's not always an easy thing to do, is it? It's hard. And all of us have been challenged in those areas, whether it's been individually or collectively. We've had to forbear. We've had to resist from pointing the finger back. That's not always been easy. How do we do these? How do we react to adversity? Sometimes our reaction can be worse than the confrontation. So let's go over to Colossians chapter 3 and let's see an example. Paul had the same thing in mind when he talked to these different churches. He saw the same things taking place because we're all human beings. We're all learning, we're all growing. Colossians chapter 3, let's begin here in verse 12. Colossians 3, verse 12. Once again, understanding who we are. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering. Look how these tie together here. Bearing with one another and forgiving each other if anyone has a complaint against the other, even so as Christ forgave you, thus you must always do. And he goes on to admonish even more. I want to focus in on it, and on that point right there. Forbearing with one another, having that long-suffering. It's not always easy to do, is it? That's in the book of Colossians. Let's go over to the book of Romans. Let's go to the book of Romans. So here he is speaking to those in Rome. Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2, and let's look at verse 1. Paul, a servant, that's Romans chapter 1, Romans 2, verse 1. Therefore you are inexcusable, O man, whoever you are who judge. For on whatsoever you judge another, you condemn yourself, for you who judge practice the same things. But we know that the judgment of God is according to truth against those who practice such things. And you think this, O man, that you who judge those practicing such things, that doing the same, you'll escape the judgment of God? How do you despise the riches of his goodness, his forbearance, and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leads you to repentance? So, example, Sometimes we may see somebody doing something that we might not like, and we make a judgment not knowing why the person is doing that. Why did that person lay his horn into me? It'll get you mad sometimes, and it always happens, like as I bring out so many times when you're driving. We might get mad at somebody. I used that example, I believe, last time I was here. I'll just repeat it if I didn't. But as you're driving along and somebody is driving in that fast lane, they're supposed to move over, aren't they, if somebody's faster behind them? So sometimes it'll happen, though, that they're going along at maybe lesser than the speed limit, and I don't know why, but all of a sudden the first thing that come out, why is this person going so slow? And we start to render some judgments. This must either be an idiot or a jerk or something, and we have no idea about this person. They may be dazed in some other planet. They may have just gone through a loss. Who knows why, but we don't know, and yet we get mad at them because they're not supposed to be in that lane. And that never happens to us, does it? We've never done that before. Oh, don't let God go back through the recordings and show us where that's happened. Somehow we've stuck there, where our mind is in a daze, and all of a sudden we look in the rearview mirror. Oh, wow, there's a person right behind us on our tail. Why is he so close? Because you just forgot you weren't watching and you slowed up below the speed limit, and they're probably thinking the same thing about you. So you get over and you start to try to pass them, and then for some reason they start to speed up. Did you ever know that? And that one, to me, was a pruning process. And I got pruned, and I smile at it now because I'm thinking, I don't know for sure, but sometimes it may be just in their mindset. They think, oh, I need to go faster. Now you're thinking, as I'm trying to pass you, now you're thinking of that. Or it could be, they're just not going to let you in front. They are being a jerk. Now, you can let that ruin your whole day, or you can let it fly by you, not let it affect you in any way. Go, guess what? This is one of those pruning things. I'm just going to laugh at it. I'd laugh at it now. I just will laugh. I won't laugh too hard because God will go, you think you got that one down, I'm going to give you another one. I'm going to prune you even a little bit more here. But it's interesting, those things that will come upon us in different ways. You might have a pretty good job in your place of business, but somebody else among you is trying to take your job. They're speaking behind your back, telling bad things about you. As I mentioned, even the kids when they go to school and you get a bully that comes upon you, you can do just as Hezekiah did. Be strong and of good courage, and you can go back and appeal to God and say, God, I need your help here. This guy's a lot bigger than me. I'm certainly not going to take him on in a fight. Help me to be the example, to shine as a light, and please help me through this. Our kids can do this as examples. Have all kinds of examples that are here. So it's important for us to understand what God has for us in the Scriptures when it comes to these testimonies. Let's look over finally in this topic of forbearance. Let's look over to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is the blank chapter of Corinthians. The love chapter. The love chapter. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Call it the love chapter. I'm not going to go through all of these. But let's look what it says in verse 4 when it comes to love. Love suffers long, not short. So right here he points out long-suffering. That's that concept of love. And it's kind. Verse 7, it bears all things. It bears all things. So that's the concept that's even intertwined with the fruit of love. That's how deep this topic of long-suffering goes for us to understand this. And sometimes it takes for us, which I'm going to stop here pretty soon because I don't want to go through all these points today. I'd like us to really just think about these things through the week on what we've been through. Where do we stand with this fruit? Have we done this? Consider this and all the different issues. I know some, once again, when it comes You get these different issues that come up sometimes whenever there's organized things that take place in such a big way. It could be festival registration. It could be a lot of different things. We're still getting used to the sales force. Not everybody operates the same. We found, I'll say here, those here found out that the international areas don't always operate like the United States. Sometimes they function a little bit differently. And it's just the way it is. It's the way it happens. We try to work out the bugs, but that's what happens sometimes. So we have little challenges that are there sometimes. We had challenges last year, I remember, as far as the choral room, because we had the festival youth instruction that was there in a couple mornings. So I had to get back together with, I thought everything was all set up, here we go, and no festival youth instruction. Well, I have to have a place for the choir to practice. And it's virtually impossible to practice on the stage when all the people are coming in. There's so many distractions. So I don't care if I have to go outside. I'm finding a place to practice. But we worked that out, and we had to forbear with each other, and it worked out. And normally all the time, God, please help with this. Help to work this out because it's so important. This comes to worshiping you. And it always happens. Something works out because the people of God are very good when it comes to this adaptability. The ability, as you go back all the way to Jekyll Island, some of you remember when the light bulbs were popping. You know, it was great. You didn't have any complaints. It was cold. It was probably really rainy and wet. And I didn't hear a lot of people were murmuring at the time. I think most people were just really, really happy to be there. And that's a great example to hear on what happens sometimes. It always just doesn't work, but we get used to things going so well and being in these nice, lush places that when something goes wrong, the attitudes are tested. And that's where this concept comes in, right at those times. Forbearance, patience with one and another. Let's look at point D. Let's look at patience, and we'll stop here. D is patience. So we have endurance, forbearance, or fortitude, forbearance, and now this word called patience, which is intertwined with forbearance. But let's look at the word patience. Now, it's important to look at all these words. Calm endurance of pain or any provocation. It can mean perseverance or stick-to-itiveness. Listen to this. A quiet and self-possessed waiting for something. A quiet and self-possessed waiting for something. Most of the times in our trials, when you've done the best that you can do, we have a waiting process that takes place. You might be asking God, show me out. If there's anything else that I can do, please show me. But you might have exhausted all of your efforts. Now it just comes to a time. I remember this happening to a lot of God's people when it comes to jobs. I've got these. I've put all these resumes out. I've done the best that I can. God help me. God show me. I remember once I was looking for work. I knew a CEO. I knew I had some options out there. I didn't get in because of the CEO. I didn't because I had 3 options. I didn't get in because of the second one. I didn't get in because of the third one. I got in because of the fourth one, which I didn't have a fourth one. So that's how God worked that out. In the meantime, I learned about long-suffering and forbearance and patience. And I learned to help people to say, by the way, you've got a trial right now, and we're all praying about that. And by the way, I believe this is going to end because he knows and recognizes your need to have a job and provide an income. So it might be a time. It might be a shorter time. It might be a bit longer of a time. Either way, the outcome for people to wait, that's why I explain to people that are older, that you're sorry, but you're not going to be younger anymore. And I'm feeling that. I can't do things I used to do and won't even do them because things just hurt a lot more, take longer to heal now, and that's just the way it is. So I'm long-suffering to wait until the kingdom, and I just told someone this morning that is really hurting all the time, does the best that they can do. But I said, I see you in the kingdom, and she's shorter. And I said, I'm going to see you, and you're going to be taller than you are now. Number one, because she wants to be. And I go, and you're going to be. I go, wow, you're looking really good. Well, I can't imagine somebody as a spirit being that's not going to look good. So I can easily say that. That's not speculative. So she's going to be very pretty. Now, I can't even say she, can I? We're neither male nor female. So there's going to be an appearance, a form that's going to have a nice appearance. And I kind of threw this in some hope that's there. I'm going to go, you're going to have, whatever you're wearing, it's going to have a C on it. I say, you're going to be captain of the volleyball team. And to think that she could even jump now or do anything like that, not possible. But there will be a time when the people that are hurting, the people that can't see, the people that can't hear, that have long suffered because God has chosen not to heal them at this point, they're going to be healed. Guess who's going to feel great? I can't imagine being blind and not being able to see. And yet you have to endure a life that way. Not being able to hear, not being able to do so many things, but the time is going to come, and that's why you start getting this feast fever, because you recognize the Spirit within us yearns for this time. We're not just looking to the physical Feast of Tabernacles, we're looking to the real thing. This is going to happen. We're going to smile at each other. Nothing's going to hurt anymore. It'll be over. And that's been God's plan. And so we learn these things in the process. We learn to not just have endurance of pain, we learn to have a calm endurance of pain. That people will look at you and not, wow, look at these people, they're suffering, and they're calm, they're collected, they're not angry, they don't lash out, they don't get all stirred up and agitated, they don't worry because they've been anxious for nothing. All these things are a process of what we learn. Calm endurance or pain or any provocation. Quiet and self-possessed, waiting for something. We are waiting for something. We're waiting for Christ to return. So all this stuff can stop. But yet we're being pruned in the process so we can do it the right way. Let's finish up here with 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 18. 1 Peter 2, verse 18. 1 Peter 2, verse 18, servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable, if because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it when you are beaten for your faults, but that you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer for it and take it patiently, this is commendable before God. For this is why you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow in his steps. So the only thing that we're doing here is we're measuring up to the stature and fullness of Christ, which is what our job is and responsibility to do. So as we look through all of these different examples, understand that this word long-suffering as a fruit, it's something that we should be growing in so many different aspects, in so many different ways. And every aspect of your life, every day, this fruit will come out. And you'll either grow in it or it'll start to wither. Don't let it wither. That's why we need to think about it. Where do we stand before God simply just with this one element, this one fruit? There's a lot to be said about it because it produces so much, not just within our lives, but all the people that we affect and are around. It comes down to really service to other people. So let's go ahead and let's not short suffer. Let's bear with all people and all things, and let's continue to grow in this fruit of long suffering.